Have you ever just looked around and thought to yourself, why is everything so stuck? I mean, we've got all this knowledge, all this technology, literally all the information in the world in our pockets. So why do some of our biggest, most basic problems, traffic, education, you name it, feel completely impossible to solve?
All right, let's really dig into that. This is the big puzzle we're going to try to unpack today. We're going to lean on the work of a thinker named Tinas Titis, who's been wrestling with this question his whole life. And trust me, his answers, they're not what you'd expect. They get at some really deep truths about how we think, how we talk, and how we try and fail to work together.
So the first piece of this puzzle comes from a really powerful metaphor. Tinnett says we need to imagine our smart, educated, modern society not as some well-oiled machine, but as something he calls a society of dry sand.
He puts it this way: our educated class is like dry sand. You can't make a snowball out of it. Just picture that for a second. You can have a beach full of brilliant individual grains of sand, but if you try to pack them together, they just slip right through your fingers. There's no cohesion, no way to form them into something solid, something with impact.
So what's missing? What's the water that we need to turn all of that sand into a snowball? Well, for Tiz, that binding element, that moisture, is a shared understanding of our biggest ideas. You see, we have plenty of smart individuals. The grains of sand are there. What we're missing is the glue that holds them together, a common language for the concepts that matter most.
And here's where it gets really tricky. If I say the word chair, you and I both picture pretty much the same thing. But what about when we use huge, abstract words like justice or freedom or progress? It turns out we're all walking around with our own secret personal dictionaries. We think we're on the same page, but we're actually speaking completely different languages without even realizing it. And how can you possibly collaborate like that?
But hold on, because the problem gets even deeper. It's not just about us misunderstanding the words we do have. The really big danger can come from the crucial concepts that are completely missing from our vocabulary.
For example, let's take the concept of a conflict of an interest. In a lot of places, this is a bedrock idea for public ethics. It's a really clear line in the sand designed to stop corruption before it even starts.
So what happens in a culture where there isn't a native, widely understood word for that exact idea? Does that conceptual space just stay empty?
Nope, not a chance. A vacuum like that almost never stays empty. As Titis points out in Turkish culture, for instance, that exact gap is filled by a very common saying, "Bal tutan parmak yalar."
And the translation is as simple as it is devastating. The one who holds the honey licks his finger. Think about that. Where one culture created a concept to prevent corruption, another has a popular saying that basically normalizes it. It implies that, yeah, of course, if you're in charge of the honeypot, you're going to take a little for yourself. It's only natural. A truly harmful idea has rushed in to fill that void.
Okay, so we've got a language problem. That's a huge piece of it. But there's another major reason we can't solve these big problems. We're showing up to a modern 21st century fight with an outdated mental toolkit.
The analogy here is just perfect. You wouldn't try to fix a supercomputer with a wrench and a screwdriver from your granddad's garage, right? Today's problems aren't simple mechanical things. They're dynamic, interconnected systems, and they demand completely new ways of thinking. So what does a new tool look like? Well, one idea is swarm intelligence. Instead of some leader at the top barking orders, we can actually learn from nature. Think about a flock of birds or a school of fish. Each individual is just following a few simple rules, like stay close to your neighbor, but not too close, and match their speed. And from those incredibly simple local actions, you get this amazing, complex, coordinated behavior for the whole group. And the key is, there's no central boss. Imagine applying that to something like traffic flow. Here's another powerful new tool, collective forecasting. There's this amazing real-world example called the Good Judgment Project. It's fascinating. Instead of just asking a few so-called experts, they crowdsource predictions about big global events from thousands of regular people. And then the system identifies the super forecasters, not based on their job title or their fancy degree, but simply on their track record of being right. It's a way to cut through the noise and actually see the future a little more clearly.
So, okay, we need a shared language and we need better, more modern tools. But even with the absolute best tools in the world, we can still manage to make things worse. And that brings us to what Titus argues is the final and maybe the most profound principle of all, a fundamental mindset of do no harm. Now I know this sounds totally backwards at first, but just think about it for a second. We are all born as incredible learning machines. We're naturally curious.
But so often, traditional education comes along and basically says, sit down. I will teach you. Without me, you can't learn. Titzik argues that this very act can be the greatest harm of all, because it can literally crush our innate natural ability to discover things for ourselves.
And this leads to a really radical idea. What if the path to solving our biggest problems isn't about finding the next clever thing to do? What if it's actually about figuring out all the harmful things we need to stop doing? It's about becoming what Titus calls a non-harming world citizen. And you can see how this one simple principle just expands and covers everything. It's like a cascade. It starts with the most basic rule of decency: do no harm to other people. But then it ripples out: do no harm to the planet, do no harm to the complex systems that we all rely on for survival, and just as important, do no harm to yourself.
So that's the thought I really want to leave you with today. If the first, most powerful rule for making things better is simply to do no harm, then what is one thing, just one, that we as individuals or as a whole society could simply stop doing right now that would actually start to solve some of our biggest problems?